The emergency room had seen a lot of things. Code blues, gunshot wounds coming in, 3 at a time, on a Saturday night. A man who had driven himself to the hospital with a kitchen knife still in his shoulder because he didn't want to wait for an ambulance. But nobody, not one person in the 12-hour shift that had just begun at Callaway General Hospital, had ever seen 3 federal officers walk through the sliding doors in full tactical gear, move past every attending physician, past the department director, past the charge nurse, past every person with a title and a white coat, and stop dead in front of a woman in blue scrubs who was scrubbing dried blood off her forearms the sink, like it was any other morning. Sergeant First Class Nora Voss, the lead officer, said, "The woman at the sink didn't turn around right away." The entire ward went quiet. Before we go any further, if you're new here, subscribe right now, because this is the channel where the stories that keep you up at night live. Hit like if you're already hooked, and drop a comment telling me what city or country you're watching from. I want to see exactly how far this story travels. Now let's get into it. The morning had started the way most mornings did at Callaway General Hospital in Denton Falls, which is to say badly, and getting worse by degrees before the first hour was done. Nora Voss arrived at 5:47 a.m., 13 minutes before her shift was supposed to begin. She had been doing this for 3 years, arriving early, leaving late, filling the gaps that other people didn't notice or didn't bother to fill. It was not a habit born from ambition. She wasn't angling for a promotion. She wasn't trying to impress anyone. She arrived early because she had learned, in a different life and under very different circumstances, that the 13 minutes before anything was when everything went sideways, and she preferred to be standing when it did. She changed in the locker room, pulled her dark hair back into a knot at the base of her neck, and stood at the sink for 30 seconds with cold water running over her wrists. She'd been doing that since before she could remember consciously deciding to do it. A regulation thing, from a time when regulation was the difference between functional and not. She didn't analyze it anymore. It was just part of how she started. The floor she worked was the trauma bay attached to the main emergency department, a long, harsh-lit corridor of curtained bays that smelled like antiseptic and reheated coffee, staffed by a rotating cast of people who were either brilliant and exhausted or mediocre and comfortable, and who mostly stayed in their lanes. Nora had made a private study of the place over 3 years and 2 months. She knew which doctors listened and which ones performed listening while already having decided. She knew which patients were going to be difficult before she entered the room, not from any mystical intuition, but from reading posture and affect, and the particular way certain kinds of fear expressed itself in the body. She knew which monitors on the floor ran slightly slow and which ran slightly fast. She knew the building in the way that people know places they have had to learn out of necessity rather than comfort. The department director was a man named Dr. Philip Garrett. He was waiting near the nurse's station when she came onto the floor. Garrett was competent in the specific, limited way of people who had never had their competence seriously tested. He was good at administration, adequate at diagnosis, and he had a quality that Nora had observed in a small but consistent category of people throughout her life. He was threatened by capability he couldn't easily categorize. She had filed 4 incident reports in 3 years, 2 of which had directly prevented patient deaths. Both had been reclassified as administrative concerns by Garrett's office within a week of submission. She had stopped expecting anything different. "Voss," he said without looking up from his tablet. "Room 7 is pending lab results. Nothing from you until they're back." "I looked at the preliminary panel on my way in," she said. "Potassium's trending low. His rhythm is being monitored by equipment that costs more than your annual salary," Garrett said. Still not looking up. "The equipment will tell us what we need to know. I'd like to examine him before you'll wait for the labs." He finally looked up, and his expression had that particular quality of patience performed for an audience of one. I understand you have strong instincts, Voss. I genuinely do. This is a hospital, not whatever it is you think strong instincts are a substitute for. Data. We wait for data. She looked at him for a moment. I'll note my concern in the chart. You'll see to room 4, he said. Family's been waiting 30 minutes for someone to explain discharge instructions. Yeah. She went to room 4. She explained the discharge instructions thoroughly and with genuine care, because the family in room 4 had not done anything wrong, and the fact that she was being managed who confused authority with expertise was not their problem. When she was done, and the family had thanked her, she went to room 7. Gerald Ott was 61 years old. He had come in with fatigue and chest tightness that his wife had insisted was serious enough to warrant a trip to the ER, and he had agreed the way people agree when they are trying to appear unconcerned about something that is actually concerning them. He was sitting up in the bed when Nora came in, wearing a hospital gown and the particular expression of a man who has decided to be cooperative about a process he finds undignified. Morning, Mr. Ott, she said. I'm Nora. I'll be your nurse this morning. Keeping me long? He asked. Depends on what the labs say. She moved to the monitor, checked the readout, and then did what she always did, pressed 2 fingers lightly to his wrist, just below the base of his thumb, and counted. How long have you had the chest tightness? Couple days, he said. My wife makes it sound like I was dying on the kitchen floor. She's here with you, right? Nora asked. Waiting room. I told her she didn't need to sit in here and stare at me. The rhythm under Nora's fingers skipped, not dramatically, not the kind of thing that set off alarms, not the kind of thing that a monitor running standard parameters would flag as critical. But there. A brief interruption in the pattern, a fractional pause where the beat should have been continuous. She counted for another 15 seconds, confirming it wasn't a one-time artifact, and then released his wrist and made a note on the chart terminal. I'm going to order an additional ECG, she said, keeping her voice easy. I thought they already did that. Different configuration. Gives us more information. She entered the order before she went to find Garrett, because she had learned that entering the order and then discussing it was more effective than asking permission and having the request dismissed before it existed anywhere official. She found Garrett at the coffee station. Which was where he spent between 20 and 40% of his working hours, depending on how much was happening on the floor. She explained what she had found: the rhythm anomaly, the potassium trend, her recommendation. He listened the way he always listened to her, chin slightly raised, eyes moving to a point just over her left shoulder, body already angled toward the next thing he intended to do. Manual pulse assessment, he said when she finished. Yes, you flagged an arrhythmia with your fingers. I flagged an irregular rhythm that the monitor's parameters aren't catching at their current sensitivity settings, she said. I'd like the 12-lead ECG, and I'd like to tighten the monitoring interval. The 12-lead will show the same thing the bedside monitor is showing, he said, which is a slightly low potassium and an unremarkable rhythm. The preliminary potassium was low. I expect the full panel to show it's lower than the preliminary suggested. Combined with the rhythm irregularity, Voss. He set his coffee down with the deliberateness of a man making a point through the placement of objects. I will say this once more, and then I'd like us to move forward. This department runs on evidence and protocol, not on bedside intuition, not on instinct, and not on feelings, however well developed those feelings might be. When the lab results come back, we will act on them. Until then, you will please manage your other patients and let the equipment do its job. She looked at him for a moment. I wanted in the chart that I recommended the ECG. Noted, he said. Room 4 discharge, please. She had already done room 4. She didn't say that. She went back to the floor and moved through the morning with the focused efficiency of someone who knows that staying busy is sometimes the only available alternative to having the wrong kind of conversation with the wrong kind of person. The lab results came back at 7:22 a.m. She was at the terminal when they populated. She read the potassium level first, lower than the preliminary, lower than she had predicted, low enough to be clinically significant in conjunction with the cardiac symptom picture. Then the enzyme panel, a flag she had been expecting, subtle, the kind of marker that a careful reader caught and a distracted one didn't. She was already moving toward room 7 before she had fully processed the decision to move. Gerald Ott's color had changed. His wife was in the room now. Apparently, she had decided that waiting in the waiting room was worse than being in the room being stared at, and she was standing next to the bed, with one hand pressed flat against his forearm, watching him with the very specific alertness of someone who has realized that something is different and wrong and doesn't yet know what to do with that information. "How long has he been like this?" Nora asked, moving to the monitor. 20 minutes, maybe, the wife said. "He said he was cold. Keeps saying he's cold." The readout on the monitor was still unremarkable by the parameters it was running. Nora pressed her fingers to his wrist again. The rhythm she found there was worse, a longer dropout, a compensatory flutter after it that hadn't been present an hour ago, the kind of progression that in her experience had a limited window before it stopped being manageable with standard intervention. She pressed the call button on the wall. "I need a crash cart to Bay 7, she said, keeping her voice entirely level because the wife was standing 4 feet away. An alarm in a caregiver's voice is contagious in ways that make the next 5 minutes harder. "And get Dr. Garrett." "The monitor's not." The charge nurse started from the hallway. "Petra," Nora said. "Crash cart. Garrett, please." Petra Maldonado had been the charge nurse on this floor for 6 years, and she was one of the best people Nora had worked with in any context, which was a statement that covered a fairly wide range of contexts. She had a quality that Nora respected. She knew when to ask questions and when to move. She moved. Garrett arrived 90 seconds later, with the energy of a man who has been interrupted and expects to be vindicated by the interruption. He looked at the monitor. He looked at Gerald Ott. He looked at Nora with an expression that was beginning to prepare itself for "told you so." "The readout is showing." "Look at him," Norris said. Garrett looked at Gerald Ott. In the time it had taken them to have that exchange, something had shifted. Gerald Ott's face had gone slack, the left side slightly more than the right, and his hands, both of them, resting on the blanket, had begun to tremble with the fine, rapid quality of muscle compromise. His wife said his name, and her voice came out wrong, higher than she intended, and she reached for him. "Get her back," Nora said to Petra, and Petra moved the wife gently back from the bed, talking to her quietly, while Nora positioned herself and called the rhythm, and called the intervention with the specific, sequenced clarity of someone who has been in rooms where the difference between a clear instruction and an unclear one was measured in someone's survival. She was aware of Garrett standing at the periphery of her field of vision, recalibrating. She didn't focus on him. The monitor alarm finally tripped 4 seconds after she already started the response, which was about what she had expected. 11 minutes later, Gerald Ott was stabilized. The room had the particular quality that acute rooms have after a crisis. Resolves the equipment still running, the still present, but downshifting, voices dropping from functional urgency to something quieter. Gerald Ott's wife was crying in the corner chair without seeming to be aware she was crying. Gerald Ott himself was breathing steadily, his color returning in increments. Garrett stood at the foot of the bed. He looked at the chart. He looked at Nora. "Good catch," he said. She held his gaze. Flagged it twice. A pause. "Good catch," he said again. The same words. No different weight behind them, and he turned and left the room. Petra caught Nora's eye across the space between them, and Nora read what was in that look: the acknowledgement, The frustration, the complicated solidarity of people who work inside systems that are wrong and small, grinding, persistence way. And she returned it with a brief nod and went to the sink outside the room to wash her hands, taking longer than she needed to, letting the water run cold over her wrists, the way she did at the start of a day when she needed to reset. She was on her third cup of bad coffee, and in the middle of documenting a secondary case when the doors at the far end of the corridor opened. She heard them before she saw them. The sound was specific. Particular cadence and weight to the footfall. 3 people moving in coordination through a space not designed for that kind of movement. Not rushing, but not browsing, either. The gait of people with a destination and a reason. Nora had spent enough time around that category of person to identify the sound before she had consciously decided to identify it. She looked up. 3 of them came through the doors. 2 men flanking a woman who was clearly running point. None of them were in uniform, but none of them needed to be. They wore dark utility clothing that sat somewhere between federal agent and military contractor, and they moved the way people move when the clothes are not the important part. The woman leading was tall, maybe 50, with gray beginning at her temples and cut close on the sides. She had the kind of eyes that stay very still while everything around them is assessed, which is a quality you see in particular professions. She was scanning the ward. Nora recognized the pattern systematic, left to right in sections, dismissing and noting, moving forward through the space toward whatever she had fixed as the target. Her eyes landed on Nora. She stopped walking. "Sergeant First Class Nora Voss," she said. The ward went quiet in that wave pattern way, the silence moving outward from that single sentence. A monitor beeped. A clipboard hit the tile somewhere to Nora's left, loud in the sudden absence of the ambient noise that always filled a working hospital floor. Nora set her coffee cup down on the counter. She looked at the 3 of them, the woman up front, the 2 men behind her, the positions relative to each other and to the room, the absence of visible weapons that didn't mean the absence of weapons. She looked at the woman's face. "I go by Nora," she said. "Just Nora." "Not anymore," the woman said. "We have a situation." Garrett materialized from somewhere behind the nurse's station, with the reflexive presence of a man who considers himself necessary to every room he occupies. Stepped forward with his chin up. "I'm sorry. This is a medical facility, and whatever this is." The woman looked at him for exactly 1 second. "Sir, this doesn't involve you." "I am the department director of Sir." The word came out with a particular flatness that was not rude and was not loud and communicated, with a precision that Nora recognized and appreciated that the conversation was over. Garrett's mouth closed. The woman looked back at Nora. "Somewhere private," she said. Nora studied the 3 of them for a moment. The man on the right had positioned himself slightly forward of the man on the left, not conspicuously, not in a way that most people would register, in the specific way of someone who had trained for a particular role in a team context and whose body defaulted to it automatically. The woman's weight was distributed through the balls of her feet. All 3 of them were fully present in the room, in a way that most people in most rooms were not. "Break room," Nora said. "Follow me." She could feel the stairs as she walked. Garrett's, Petra's, 2 nurses at the station whose names she knew, the orderly at the far end, who had stopped pushing his cart to watch. She didn't look back. The break room was at the end of the secondary corridor, small and slightly depressing, with a laminate table and chairs that didn't match and a refrigerator that hummed at a frequency that got inside your head after about 10 minutes. She closed the door behind the 4 of them. The lead woman pulled a tablet from her bag and turned it face out toward Nora. A satellite image of a building government architecture, federal facility. She recognized the type without knowing the specific address. Below the image, hostages 23 confirmed. "Hargrove Federal Processing Center," the woman said. "Denton Falls District. At 340 this morning, a man named Aldrich Payne and a 6-person team seized the building during the overnight shift change. He has had 2 communications with our negotiator since then. She paused briefly. He has one demand. Nora was already looking at the number under the image. Me, she said. A beat. Yes. How do you know he's not performing? At 412, he shot a federal security officer in the lower leg. The woman said, non-fatal, deliberately so. He then provided, over the radio, specific medical instructions for wound management elevation, compression, tourniquet positioning. He wanted us to understand both what he was capable of and that he had the knowledge to calibrate it. She let that land. He is not someone who makes threats as theater. Nora was quiet for a moment. The refrigerator hummed. Outside the door, the hospital continued PA announcements, the distant sound of wheels on tile, the ordinary machinery of a place where people came to be put back together. Aldrich Payne, she said. You recognize the name. Yes. We need the context before we can brief you fully. The nature of your connection to him. Nora looked at the tablet. 23 people in a wired building. A name she had not said out loud in 4 years. Carried the way you carry things that are too heavy to put down and too large to forget you're holding. What's your name? She asked. Director Evelyn Callum. Federal Special Operations Liaison. The woman gestured to the 2 behind her. Reeves and Park. Nora looked at both of them briefly. Reeves was the one who had taken the forward position. Park had said nothing and moved nothing that wasn't necessary, which told her he was the more experienced of the 2. She looked back at Callum. 5 minutes, she said. We're on a hard 5 minutes, Nora said. I have a patient who needs a specific handoff. After that, I'll give you everything you need. Callum looked at her for a long moment. Not the look of someone assessing whether to allow it, the look of someone revising an assumption they had arrived with. 5 minutes, she said. Nora went back onto the floor. She went directly to room 7. Gerald Ott was resting with his eyes half open, the particular not quite asleep that follows a close call, and his wife had stopped crying and was sitting next to him, holding his hand in both of hers. Nora checked the monitor, reviewed the entries in the chart, confirmed that the documentation was complete and specific. She found Petra in the hallway just outside. 30-minute vitals on Ott, she said. Not the standard cycle. Every 30 minutes until cardiology sees him. If anything drifts rhythm, pressure, temp you call doctor. Fannin on call, not Garrett. Fannin. I've flagged it in the chart with the arrhythmia documentation. Petra was looking at her with a different quality of attention than usual. Nora, what's happening? I have to leave, Nora said. Mid-shift. Tell Garrett it's a family emergency. Is it? Nora considered that for a second. In a way, she said. She went back to the break room. Callum was standing in the same spot, same posture, same stillness. Shh. Reeves and Park were positioned near the walls. The tablet was still in Callum's hand, the image of the Hargrove building still on the screen. Operational context, Nora said, closing the door. Go. Callum pulled up a second image older, different visual quality, the kind of aerial photograph produced by satellite rather than drone, with coordinate stamps at the margins. Compound. Lower elevation, surrounded by terrain that told you something about geography without identifying it precisely. Nora's body registered the image before her mind had finished processing it, a low, specific tension moving through her shoulders. Operation Watershed, Callum said, 4 years ago. You were the senior combat medic assigned to an 8-person extraction team. Primary objective, retrieve a federal informant from a holding location inside a secured compound. I know what the objective was, Nora said. Aldrich Payne was field commander for a contracted security unit operating inside the same compound. His team was there when your extraction went in. 3 members of his team were killed in the breach. Payne himself sustained critical injuries traumatic to the left thorax, significant blood loss. 14 months of recovery. Callum's voice remained level and professional, the voice of someone reading from a file, rather than from experience. He was medically discharged. He has not been in any official capacity since. I know all of that, Nora said. What you may not know is the narrative he has constructed around it. Callum lowered the tablet slightly. Payne believes the intelligence that placed his team inside that compound was deliberately rerouted to your extraction unit. He believes the conflict was engineered. He believes that you were briefed on his team's presence before the breach. She paused. He believes you went in anyway. The break room was very quiet. That's not what happened, Nora said. I know that. The intelligence we received placed the compound as holding the informant and 2 guards. No secondary unit. When we breached and found Payne's team, it was too late to abort without losing the objective. And the informant, Callum said. The operational record is clear. The intelligence failure has been documented, and the source of the bad data has been identified. It was a routing error at the processing level, not deliberate manipulation. She set the tablet on the table. Payne has spent 4 years building a different version. And at some point, the version he built became the only version he is capable of seeing. He is not irrational, Nora. That is the thing you need to understand going into this. He is a rational, disciplined, trained operative who is working from a completely false set of facts, which is significantly more dangerous than someone who has simply broken down. Nora was quiet for a moment. She was thinking about Aldrich Payne's face. She had seen in person only once, for approximately 4 seconds, in a compound corridor, under conditions that were not conducive to extended observation. She was thinking about what 14 months of recovery looked like from the inside, and what 4 years of building a story looked like, and what the end point of all of that looked like from where she was standing now. Hostage profile, she said. Night shift staff, intake processors, 2 security personnel, both disarmed, both alive as of the last communication administrative staff who were running a late filing cycle. We believe there are between 23 and 28 people total. Building configuration. Callum pulled up a floor plan on the tablet and handed it to her. Nora took it and looked at it with the kind of attention that processes architecture as tactical information entry points. Interior partitions, stairwell positions, the relationship between room functions and likely occupation patterns during an overnight shift. He's wired it, she said. It wasn't a question. Confirmed. Bomb disposal is on the perimeter. We don't know the configuration, how many devices, where they're placed, whether they're centralized or distributed. Who's running the tactical unit? Commander Wade Okafor. He's staged 2 blocks east with a 12-person team. He knows I'm involved. He was briefed this morning, Callum said, with a slight flatness that communicated everything about how that briefing had gone, and his position on it. He is a professional, Callum said carefully. He will work with the situation as it stands. Nora handed the tablet back. I need to change, she said. I'm not doing this in scrubs. She watched Callum's face again, that micro-adjustment, that recalibration happening behind the eyes of someone who has been holding an incomplete picture and is now receiving a piece that changes what the picture is. We have a bag in the vehicle, Callum said. We anticipated you might engage. What made you think I would? Callum looked at her steadily. Because there are, at minimum, 23 people in that building, she said. And because I read your file. All of it, not just the parts that were easy to find. Nora looked at her for a moment. Then she pushed off the counter and opened the door. In the corridor outside, Garrett was standing perhaps 20 feet away, not moving, holding his tablet against his chest. He had clearly been standing there for the last several minutes, which told her he had sent no one else to find her and had come himself. Told her something about the quality of his concern, whether it was for her or for the optics of a federal presence in his department. She couldn't say and didn't particularly care. He looked at her. He looked at the 3 people behind her. Something moved through his expression in sequence confusion. Professional offense? And then Underneath it, the beginning of a reckoning he wasn't going to enjoy having. "Voss," he said. "Can someone tell me?" "Mr. Ott in room 7, she said, walking past him. 30-minute vitals. Cardiology consult, not standard review. It's in the chart. Voss. She kept walking. The sliding doors at the end of the corridor opened ahead of her, and the morning air of Denton Falls came in through the gap, cold and gray, carrying the smell of the street, ordinary outside world that she had been walking inside of for 3 years and 2 months, and which now felt in the way that familiar things feel when you're looking at them for what might be the last time for a while. Very distinct and specific. A black vehicle sat at the curb with the engine running. She got in. The doors closed, and the hospital disappeared from her immediate reality. Still there, still running, Gerald Ott's heart beating in corrected rhythm in room 7. Petra checking vitals on the 30-minute cycle. Garrett standing in the corridor, trying to locate a frame for what had just happened, but receding, falling behind as the vehicle pulled away from the curb and turned east. 4 hours and 9 minutes. Aldrich Payne's name sat inside her chest like an old injury in cold weather. She had spent 4 years building the distance between herself and Operation Watershed, not forgetting it, because she was not capable of forgetting it and had never tried, but containing it, keeping it in a place that wasn't the center of things. She had become good at that. She had become, in fact, quite good at a lot of things that nobody in Callaway General's emergency department had ever had reason to see. Stared through the windshield at the street moving past. Reeves drove. Park sat in the front passenger seat, not speaking. Callum sat next to Nora in the back and said nothing, which was something Nora noted and appreciated. The vehicle moved through the early morning cities, still sparse at this hour. Street cleaning machines moving along the gutters, delivery vans doubled at corners, the city doing the unglamorous work that kept it running before most people were awake to see it. The bag Callum had referenced was on the seat beside her. She unzipped it and looked at the contents without touching anything yet. Assessment first. It was thorough. Whoever had packed this had done their research. The right weight of clothing, the right category of equipment for the role they anticipated she would fill. She zipped it back up and rested her hand on top of it. In 14 minutes, she would meet Commander Wade Okafor, who had been briefed about her involvement and had reacted the way commanders always reacted. Because in her experience, no commander ever welcomed the existence of a variable they had not personally introduced into the equation. She would have to establish quickly and efficiently that she was not a liability or a civilian asset to be managed, but a functional part of whatever response they were building. She had done that before. She was good at it. In 20 minutes, she would see the Hargrove Federal Processing Center for the first time in person, and she would begin building a picture of the interior from the outside, because every building told you things from its exterior if you knew how to ask the right questions. And somewhere inside that building, Aldrich Payne was waiting. Not patiently, she suspected. He had been waiting 4 years. The waiting was probably over in his mind. This was the part that came after the waiting, and she did not know what that part looked like from where he was standing, but she knew what it looked like from every direction she had approached like this before. She knew that people who had built 4 years of certainty around a wrong story were some of the hardest people to reach. She also knew that unreachable was different from impossible. Callum's phone lit up on the seat between them. She glanced at the screen without meaning to and caught 2 words before looking away. He's moving. Callum's phone lit up a second time before the first notification had finished. She answered it on speaker without asking Nora's permission, which told Nora something about how the next several hours were going to run information moving fast, decisions made in real time, the courtesies of ordinary professional interaction suspended in favor of the pace that a hard deadline imposed on everything. "Talk to me," Callum said. The voice on the other end was male, clipped, background noise, suggesting a command vehicle. Payne relocated the primary hostage group from the ground floor processing area to the interior conference block on level 2. We lost visual on at least 6 of them in the transition. He did it in a 4-minute window, and he didn't announce it. Just moved them. Why, Callum said. It was not a question so much as a directive. Unknown. Bomb disposal thinks he may be clearing the ground floor for a reason, but we don't know what reason yet. Callum looked at Nora. Nora was already looking at the floor plan on the tablet in her lap. Level 2, interior conference block, she found it. A cluster of rooms set back from the exterior walls, which meant no windows, which meant no line of sight from outside, which meant that whatever Payne was doing in there was completely opaque to the perimeter team. He's reducing their visibility options, Nora said, not to Callum particularly, but to the situation. They can't see the hostages. They can't calibrate a tactical response around hostage positions. He's taken away their ability to plan a room by room. Callum relayed this to the phone. A pause then. Commander Okafor is asking who said that. Tell him it's Voss, Callum said. A longer pause. He wants to know if she's on site yet. 8 minutes out. The line went quiet for a moment, the particular quiet of someone choosing their next words. Then he says to bring her directly to the command vehicle. He wants a briefing before she goes anywhere near the perimeter. Callum looked at Nora again. Fine, Nora said. She looked back at the floor plan. The interior conference block was accessible from 2 stairwells and 1 service corridor. 3 entry points that Payne would know about because he had clearly done his homework on the building before walked to it, which meant he had those entry points factored into whatever he was thinking. She tried to build the picture from his perspective, a man who had planned this, who had chosen this building specifically, who had made one demand and was waiting for it to be met. What does the interior of the building look like to someone waiting to be found rather than trying to hide? Different geometry, different priorities. The vehicle turned onto a wider road, and the city's character changed commercial, giving way to the institutional gray of a district that housed government functions, building facades that were utilitarian by design, streets that were wider than they needed to be in a way that suggested they had been planned for vehicle access and crowd management. 2 blocks ahead, she could see the cluster of vehicles that marked the command perimeter. Dark SUVs, a large white communications van with equipment on the roof, people in gear moving between them with the organized urgency of a response that had been running for hours and was holding itself together through procedure. Beyond the vehicles, the Hargrove Federal Processing Center. It was a 9-story rectangular building with the specific visual blandness of government construction from the early 2000s, concrete and glass, in proportions that prioritized function and minimized expense, the kind of building that existed to process paperwork and house the people who processed it. The ground floor windows were dark. The upper floors showed the occasional movement of someone near glass. She couldn't determine from this distance whether it was a hostage, a guard Payne had posted, or something else. The vehicle stopped behind the communications van. Callum got out first, and Nora followed, carrying the bag. The morning air hit her colder than she expected, a wind coming in from the north that the city's buildings were channeling rather than blocking. Took one full look at the Hargrove building, not analyzing, just receiving, letting her eyes move across the exterior the way you look at anything you are about to have to understand under pressure, and then followed Callum around the side of the communications van to where a man in dark tactical gear was standing over a table mounted to the van's exterior wall, several tablets and printed schematics spread across its surface. Commander Wade Okafor was not what she had been expecting, which was not something she could have defined precisely before seeing him. He was shorter than she had pictured, compact, and still in the way of someone who spent energy efficiently. He had a trim beard going slightly gray and eyes that were currently conducting a rapid assessment of her with a professionalism that was only partially concealing a skepticism he had apparently decided not to bother hiding entirely. He looked at her for exactly the length of time it took to form a first impression. Then he looked at Callum. "This is her," he says. "Not a question." "Commander Okafor," Callum said Nora Voss. Okafor looked back at Nora. "You're the nurse." "I'm a nurse," she said, "among other things." "Among other things," he repeated, in the tone of someone who had been briefed, but the briefing had not fully landed. "I've been told you have a relevant operational background. Operation Watershed 4 years ago. I was the senior combat medic on the extraction team that ran the breach where Payne's unit was stationed." "I read the file summary," he said. "What I haven't been able to get from the file summary is why Payne is in that building, asking for you specifically instead of filing a grievance through a legal channel like anyone else who believes they've been wronged." "Because he doesn't want redress," Nora said. "He wants a conversation. He wants a lot more than a conversation. He wants to be heard by the specific person he believes owes him that," she said. "The building, the hostages, the wiring. Those are the mechanism he chose to make sure I don't have the option to not show up. He could have found me another way. He knew where I worked. He's had 4 years to find me another way." She paused. "He chose this because the size of it matches what he thinks was done to him." Okafor looked at her for a long moment. He had the quality of someone who was revising something, but doing it internally, not showing the revision. "You got any tactical training beyond the combat medic designation?" "Yes." "What kind?" "The kind I'm not going to detail for you in the next 2 minutes," standing next to a van, she said, "but enough to be useful to you rather than a problem." He held her gaze. She held his. Neither of them blinked, which was not a power contest. It was 2 people deciding what kind of working relationship they were going to have, and deciding it in real time, which was how it always worked in situations where there was no time to build trust, the slow way. "Fine," he said, finally, and turned to the schematics on the table. "Here's what we know." He walked her through it in the efficient, compressed manner of someone who had already briefed this material 3 times and had it reduced to the essential points. Payne had entered the building at 335 through the service entrance on the building's north face, which shared an access code. With the main entrance, the code had been changed 3 weeks prior, and whoever had changed it had not been Payne, which meant he had obtained it through someone or something else. He had his 6-person team with him, and they had taken the overnight staff in approximately 4 minutes fast enough that no alarm was tripped, which suggested either prior knowledge of the security protocols or someone inside who had prepared the ground. "You think he had inside help?" Nora said. "We don't know yet. We're running it." Okafor pointed to the building's east face. "Bomb disposal has confirmed IEDs at 3 confirmed locations: ground floor lobby, the main stairwell on the west side, and the service corridor on level 3. We believe there are more that we haven't located." He's using a distributed configuration, not a single central device. It means there's no one point to disable that takes the whole thing down. Nora looked at the schematic. "What's the trigger system?" "We don't know. Could be remote, could be timed, could be proximity-based. Could be all 3, depending on the device." He looked at her directly. "Bomb disposal cannot go in until the hostages are in a safer configuration than they are right now, which means we cannot clear devices until we know where the people are. And he's moved the people so you can't see them," she said. "Correct." "So what you need," she said, "is someone to go in, see where the people are, and get communication with Payne, established in a way that slows whatever timeline he's running." "What I need," Okafor said, "is a lot of things I don't currently have. What I'm working with is what's available." He looked at her in a way that was direct without being hostile. "My negotiator has been on the line with Payne twice. Both times, Payne gave his demand you and ended the call. He's not interested in negotiating the negotiation. He's waiting. Then we stop making him wait, Nora said. We're not sending you in there. You don't have another option. I have several options, he said, with the firmness of a man who has spent the morning trying to develop options and is aware that none of them are good. None of them involve putting a civilian into an active hostage environment with an armed operative who has specifically targeted her. I'm not a civilian, she said. You are for my operational purposes, he said. You are a former military medic with a combat attachment history who currently works in an emergency room. That is civilian. She looked at him. She looked at the building behind him. She thought about 23 people in an interior conference block with no windows, in a building with distributed IEDs, and a man who had had 4 years to get this right. Commander, she said, keeping her voice even and not unfriendly, I understand your position. And I am telling you that your other options have timelines that Payne's patience does not accommodate. You have, she checked her watch, 3 hours and 41 minutes until his stated deadline. Your tactical approach requires locating the people before you can clear the devices. Cannot locate the people from the outside because he has moved them. Your negotiator has failed to extend the conversation twice. The variable that has not yet been introduced into this situation is the variable Payne himself requested. She paused. You can wait until you're out of options and then send me in. Or you can accept that you're already out of options and we can stop burning time. Okafor stared at her for a moment. Behind him, Reeves and Park had positioned themselves near the van without appearing to be standing near the van, the particular unobtrusive presence of people trained to be available without being visible. Callum was watching the exchange with the stillness of someone who has already made her own calculation and is waiting for the calculation to resolve. I want a comm unit on you, he said. Open channel. Anything you learn about device locations, hostage positions, or Payne's physical state, you report it in real time. Agreed. If he gives you any indication that he's moving toward detonation, you tell me immediately. Immediately. Not after you've tried to handle it yourself. She nodded. And if this goes sideways, he said, I need you to understand that my team's primary mandate is the hostages. Not you. I know, she said. That's the right mandate. Something shifted in his face, not softening exactly, more like an adjustment. Piece of the framework he had built around this situation, moving slightly to accommodate something he hadn't fully anticipated. He looked at Callum. Get her whatever she needs from the equipment inventory, he said. She's on my channel in 15 minutes. He turned back to the schematics, and the conversation was over. Callum moved Nora to the side of the communications van, away from the foot traffic of the perimeter team. Nora opened the bag she'd been carrying and changed quickly, efficiently, with the practiced unself-consciousness of someone accustomed to changing in places less private than this. Dark clothing, appropriate layers for the building's interior temperature, boots she had worn before. Clipped the comm unit to her collar and ran a sound check with the technician in the van. While she waited for confirmation that the channel was active, she looked at the Hargrove building again. She was looking for Payne without expecting to see him. Looking at the building, the way you look at someone's expression when they don't know they're being watched for the small, unconscious communications that the surface doesn't manage to suppress. Positioning of the blocked ground floor windows. The roofline and the access points she could extrapolate from the architectural style. What the building could tell her about how someone with Payne's training would choose to deploy inside it. Comm check confirmed, the technician said. She turned back to Callum. What do you know about his physical condition? Callum frowned slightly. What do you mean? The injury he sustained in Watershed. Thoracic trauma. 14 months of recovery. What's the long-term picture? Does he have residual deficits, chronic pain, anything that affects his current physical state? His medical record from the military discharge period shows a significant recovery, but some documented nerve involvement in the left arm, Callum said. Why? Nora stored that information in the part of her mind that organized clinical data, because clinical data was never irrelevant. What's his team's configuration inside? 6 operatives. Do we know how they're distributed through the building? We believe he has 2 on the ground floor, 2 with the hostage group, and 2 whose positions we haven't confirmed. 2 unconfirmed are probably on the stairwells, Nora said. Blocking the tactical entry points he knows you're considering. He's not defending the building, he's controlling the approach paths. She looked at the schematic Okafor had left on the table. He's thought about this for a long time. Yes, Callum said. He has. Nora looked at the building one more time. Then she looked at Callum, who was watching her with the expression of someone waiting for something they expect but can't predict the timing of. The wrong intelligence that caused Watershed, Nora said. The routing error that placed his team inside the compound without our knowledge. Who was the source? A pause. It came through a contracted intelligence processor. A private firm that was handling a backlog of field reports for the agency. The specific analyst responsible was identified. And, was it ever disclosed to Payne? Callum was quiet for a moment. No, she said. The investigation findings were classified. Payne would have received a general finding of no intentional wrongdoing, but not the specifics. Nora absorbed that. So, from his perspective, she said slowly, no one ever explained what actually happened. He received a finding that exonerated the people he believed wronged him, with no detail about why or how. That's accurate. Which, if you've spent 4 years believing you were lied to, reads as exactly more of the same, she said. He doesn't know about the analyst. He doesn't know about the routing error. He just knows that the people who were supposed to explain themselves told him through a classified document that he was wrong to blame them. Yes, Callum said. Nora was quiet for a moment. The wind moved along the building's face, picking up a paper cup from the ground and turning it end over end until it caught against the wheel of a vehicle and stopped. That matters, Nora said. What happened to the analyst? Dismissed from the contracting firm. Civil penalty. No criminal prosecution. Payne doesn't know any of that. No. She put that somewhere it needed to stay accessible. Then she straightened and looked at the building with a slightly different quality of attention. Not the tactical red she had been running, but something more direct, more personal. I need 5 minutes before I go in, she said. For what? To think. Callum nodded and stepped back, which was the right response, and Nora turned toward the building and stood with her hands at her sides and let herself think about Aldrich Payne. Not as a tactical problem, not as a hostage situation variable. Person who had been handed a broken story and had spent 4 years making it whole in the only way he could figure out how. She knew what that felt like in its way. Not the same story, not the same injury, but the particular loneliness of carrying something that was not your fault and not knowing how to put it down, yes. She knew that shape. The thing she was going in there to do was not the thing Okafor thought she was going in there to do. Okafor thought she was going in to buy time and collect intelligence. Those things were true as far as they went, but the actual work, the thing that would determine whether 23 people came out of that building, was something else. Something that looked more like what she did in room 7 than what she had done in a compound corridor 4 years ago. She rolled her left shoulder once, feeling the familiar pull of an old muscle complaint that had never fully resolved, and walked to the perimeter barrier where Okafor's staff sergeant was waiting to walk her to the building's north entrance. Ready? The staff sergeant asked. Yes, she said. They walked. The distance from the command perimeter to the building's north face was approximately 60 meters, and she used every one of them to build and then let go of the last of the civilian skin she had been wearing for 3 years. Not dramatically, not with any sense of ceremony. The way you take off a jacket when the temperature changes, practical, necessary, no particular feeling about it. At the north entrance, the staff sergeant stopped. He knows you're coming. We sent the message through the building's internal system per his instructions. He paused. You go in alone. He was specific about that. I know, she said. The channel stays open. I know. The door was a standard federal access point, reinforced, keycard activated, currently propped open with a fire extinguisher, which told her that Payne had made a deliberate choice to leave this specific entry point clear. An invitation, or the appearance of one. She pushed the door open the rest of the way and stepped inside. The ground floor lobby of the Hargrove Federal Processing Center was dim, the overhead fluorescents on reduced power, ambient light coming mostly from the emergency signage, and the pale gray morning filtering through the exterior glass on the far side of the space. The lobby was large and institutional, a security desk to her, left empty, the chair pushed back in the way of someone who had stood up quickly. Processing counters to the right behind a long pane of ballistic glass. Two of Payne's people were visible immediately, one near the security desk, one positioned at the base of the main stairwell to the west. Both watching her, both armed, neither moving. She walked to the center of the lobby and stopped. Payne, she said, not loud, not at all. The acoustics of the space carried it. Nothing for a moment. Then a voice came from the stairwell from above it, not from the figures standing at its base. A man's voice, even and controlled, with the particular quality of a voice that had been managing itself for a long time and was very tired of managing itself. You came, he said. You knew I would, she said. Pause. I wasn't certain. 23 people, she said. I was always going to come. Another silence. Then footsteps on the stairwell, deliberate, unhurried, the steps of someone who has planned for this moment and is not going to rush it now that it has arrived. She watched the stairwell opening. Aldrich Payne came down the last flight of stairs and stopped at the base of them, 8 feet from his own operative, 12 feet from Nora. He was not what she had been expecting either. She had seen him for 4 seconds in poor light 4 years ago, and the image she had carried of him was partial and unreliable, built mostly from the file photographs, younger than the photographs had suggested, or aged differently, or both. He was tall, wide-shouldered, with the particular physical density of someone who had kept training through a recovery that should have stopped him from training. The left side of his body held itself slightly differently than the right, a small asymmetry in how he stood. The nerve involvement Callum had mentioned expressing itself in posture rather than function. He looked at her with the eyes of someone who has been waiting for something for so long that the arrival of it hasn't yet registered as real. You look the same, he said. I don't, she said. Neither do you. His jaw tightened slightly. Why did you come? Because you asked. That's not an answer. Because those people upstairs didn't do anything, she said. And because you and I have something we should have said to each other 4 years ago and didn't, and that's a problem I can help fix if you'll let me. She kept her voice steady. But first I need you to tell me something. His eyes narrowed slightly. What? Your left hand, she said. How long has it been shaking? The question landed in the space between them and changed the quality of the air. She saw it, the micro-flinch, the rapid internal rerouting, a man who had prepared for accusation, for confrontation, for a tactical engagement, dressed up as a conversation, and had not prepared for this. He looked down at his left hand without meaning to, trembling, not dramatically, not the seizure threshold tremor she had seen in Gerald Ott's hands that morning, but present. A fine, persistent movement that his fingers were working to suppress and couldn't quite manage. He looked back up at her. That's none of your business, he said. It is, she said quietly. It very much is. Because she had seen that tremor before in the ward, in the field, in places between the two, and she recognized what it meant. And what it meant was that the situation inside this building was significantly more dangerous than anything Okafor had calculated into his tactical response, for a reason that had nothing to do with the explosives in the walls. Payne didn't answer right away. He looked at his left hand the way people look at something that has betrayed them, not with surprise exactly, more with the exhausted recognition of someone who has been managing a problem for long enough that the management has become its own kind of denial. The tremor was there, persistent, running through the last two fingers of his left hand and into the heel of his palm. Closed his fist around it. "It's nothing," he said. "It's not nothing," Nora said. "How long?" I said, "It's nothing." Aldrich, she used his first name deliberately, not to establish intimacy, but to establish that she was talking to a person and not a situation. "I'm a trauma nurse. I've been one for 3 years. Before that, I was a combat medic for 8. That tremor has a signature. I need you to tell me how long it's been present and whether it's getting worse." He looked at her with something that was not quite anger. Anger was too simple for what was in his face. It was the expression of a man who has walked into a room prepared for one kind of confrontation and found a completely different one waiting for him, and who does not know yet whether the difference is a trap or something else. "Why does it matter to you?" he said. "Because if that tremor is what I think it is, and it's been progressive, then you may not have until noon," she said, "and neither will they." The operative near the security desk shifted his weight. The one at the stairwell base had gone very still. Payne looked at Nora with his fist still closed. 3 weeks, he said finally. "Maybe 4. Is it both hands or only the left?" "Only the left. Worse in the morning. Easier after I've been moving." He said it with the flat delivery of a man reporting a mechanical problem in a vehicle he drives but didn't build. "I've had nerve damage in that arm since Watershed. I assumed it was that. The nerve damage from the thoracic injury wouldn't present this way after 4 years of stability," she said. "Progressive tremor with morning predominance and movement relief is a different pathway." Kept her voice clinically level. Because clinical was not cold. Clinical was what you used when the alternative was panic, and panic was the last thing anyone in this building needed. "Are you having any other symptoms?" "Fatigue, beyond what's expected, any muscle stiffness, slower initiation of movement." He looked at her for a long moment. "Stairs are harder," he said quietly, like it cost him something to say it. "I thought it was the thoracic, the adhesion." "It's not the thoracic adhesion," she said. He heard what she wasn't saying. She watched him hear it, the slight change in his breathing, the way his jaw moved without producing words. A man who had spent 4 years building toward this day and was now standing in the lobby of a building he had seized at 3A. With 6 operatives and enough explosives to bring down the structure, being told by the woman he had assembled all of this to confront that the thing that was going to stop him was already inside him. "Upstairs," he said. His voice had changed, not collapsed, not soft, but different. Lower and more interior. "We talk upstairs." "Agreed," she said. She walked to the stairwell. The operative at the base stepped aside without being directed, which told her that Payne's authority over his team was real and not performed. She filed that. On the comm unit clipped to her collar, she said quietly, moving to level 2. "I'm with Payne. 2 operatives on the ground floor, 1 each at the security desk and west stairwell base. Payne is ambulatory, left-sided neurological symptoms that are not consistent with prior injury documentation." Okafor's voice came back in her earpiece, low copy. "What kind of neurological? Progressive. I'll have more when I can assess further." She put one hand on the stairwell railing. "Do not move anyone yet." A pause. "Understood. Standing by." She climbed the stairs behind Payne, who took them at a deliberate pace, and she watched his gait in the way she would watch any patient's gait, the slight favoring of the left side, the shortened stride interval on the stairs, the way he used the railing, more than he probably realized he was using it. Dramatic. It was the kind of thing you missed if you were not looking for it. And most people were not looking for it. And she suspected Payne's team had been watching their commander manage this for weeks without identifying what they were seeing. Level 2 opened into a wide corridor with glass-walled meeting rooms on both sides. At the far end, the interior conference block, a cluster of rooms without exterior windows that she had identified on the schematic. The door to the nearest of these rooms was closed. Through the narrow vertical window beside the door, she could see people seated, most of them on the floor, a few on chairs, close together. A man she took to be one of Payne's operatives was visible at the edge of the frame, standing. 23, she counted what she could see. 17 directly visible, the rest presumably in the same room or the adjacent one. Payne led her past the conference block to a smaller room at the corridor's end. A supervisor's office, a desk, 2 chairs, a whiteboard with scheduling marks still on it from the previous week. Pulled the door mostly closed and stood near the window. Not at it, beside it, which was a trained behavior, keeping himself out of the line of sight from the exterior. She sat in one of the chairs because sitting changed the geometry of the conversation, and she wanted the geometry on her side. "The people in that room," she said. "Have any of them been harmed?" "No," he said. "They need water. And anyone who has medication they take on a schedule needs access to it." He looked at her. "You're not in a position to make requests." "I'm making an observation," she said. "Dehydrated people and people in medication withdrawal become medical emergencies. Medical emergencies complicate your timeline, not mine." She held his gaze. "Give them water. It costs you nothing." A long moment. He went to the door and said something to someone in the corridor she couldn't hear. Then he came back and stood by the window with his arms crossed, his left hand tucked against his ribs. "You know why you're here," he said. "I know why you think I'm here," she said. "I'm here because you asked me to come, and because I have something to tell you that you should have been told 4 years ago. And because there are 23 people in that room down the hall who have nothing to do with what happened between us." "Between us," he repeated, with a quality of bitterness that was not hot, it was old and cold, and had been sitting in him for a long time. "What you call it?" "I call it what it is," she said. "A mission that went wrong because of bad information, not because of bad intent. Don't." His voice had an edge now. "Do not come in here and tell me it was an accident. I have read everything I can, legally and illegally access about Watershed. I know what the official finding says. I have known for 4 years what the official finding says. And I am telling you that the official finding is not what happened. Tell me what you think happened," she said. He looked at her like she was performing something. "You know what happened." "I know what happened from my side of it," she said. "I know what the intelligence said when we received it. I know what we saw when we breached, and I know what I did when I found your people inside that compound. I do not know what it looked like from where you were standing. I never have." She paused. "So tell me." He was quiet for a moment. She could see him deciding whether this was a tactic. She let him decide. She didn't fill the silence with anything, because filling silences was how you stopped people from saying the things they actually needed to say. "We were inside the compound on a contracted protection detail," he said finally. 12-hour rotation. My team had been there for 6 days. We had a briefing that morning that said the window was clear, no federal activity in the sector for the next 72 hours. Cleared by the same agency your unit was working with. His jaw tightened. 2 hours later, your team breaches the east wall. "We were told the compound held 1 informant and 2 guards," she said. "And you believed that." "I had no reason not to. The intelligence came through the same pipeline we'd used for 14 months. Convenient, Aldrich." She kept her voice level. "I lost a soldier in that breach. Sergeant First Class Marcus Webb. He was 28. He had a daughter he had met exactly once, because she was born while he was on deployment." She watched Payne's face. "I have not had a clean night of sleep since that compound. Not because I'm confessing to anything, because it went wrong and people died, and that doesn't leave you. He said nothing. Something in his posture had changed, not dramatically, not enough that his operative in the corridor would have seen it if they were watching. She saw it. 3 of my people, he said. 3. I know. Dunbar was 24. He'd been with me for 2 years. He stopped. Started again. Harwick had a wife. 2 kids. He used to show me pictures. His voice had gone quieter and more controlled, which paradoxically made it harder to listen to. I pulled him out of that corridor. There wasn't anything left to pull out by the time I got to him. The room was very quiet. I know, she said again, and meant it differently this time. They told me it was an intelligence failure, he said. That's all I ever got. An intelligence failure. Nobody's fault. Unfortunate overlap. The investigation found no evidence of intentional wrongdoing. The bitterness was fully present now. And then they medically discharged me, and that was the end of it. This was the moment. She had been moving toward it since the lobby, and she had known she was moving toward it, and now it was here. And she took a breath and said it directly. The intelligence failure has a specific source, she said. It was not in the finding they gave you, because the finding was classified at a level above yours. But I have been briefed this morning, Aldrich, and I am going to tell you exactly what happened. He went very still, she told him. The contracted intelligence processing firm. The backlog of field reports. The specific analyst who had failed to flag the conflict between 2 active operation files in the same geographic sector, not deliberately, not as part of any plan, but through a processing error that should have been caught by a review system that was itself understaffed and underfunded. She told him the analyst had been identified, had been dismissed, had faced a civil penalty. She told him that the agency had changed the processing protocols for contractor field reports as a direct result of Watershed, which changed nothing about the people who died, but was the institutional response to the failure. Told him all of it, clearly and in sequence, without softening it or framing it in a way that was designed to produce a particular reaction. Just the facts, delivered the way she delivered difficult medical information to patients fully, honestly, and with the understanding that the person receiving it deserved to have the complete picture regardless of how hard the picture was to look at. Payne listened. He did not move. He did not speak. When she stopped talking, the silence was different from the silence before. It had a different texture, the texture of something being reorganized rather than something being held in place. Processing error, he said. Yes, 3 people died because someone didn't cross-reference a file. Yes, she said. That's what happened. He turned away from her and put both hands on the windowsill, looking at the wall rather than through the window. His left hand on the sill was trembling more visibly than before, the tremor extending from the fingers up into the forearm. She watched it and said nothing, because there was a sequence to this, and she was not going to rush it. I built 4 years around the wrong thing, he said very quietly. You built 4 years around what you were given, she said, which was almost nothing. He stood at the windowsill for a long moment. She was watching his left hand. She was also listening to the building around them, the muffled sounds of the hostage room down the corridor, a distant radio transmission from one of his operatives, ambient noise of a building that was full of people and tension and devices in the walls. Then his left hand slipped, not dramatically, not a collapse. The tremor accelerated suddenly, the fine movement converting to a coarser shake, and his grip on the windowsill broke, and his arm came off the surface, and he turned and grabbed for the edge of the desk and caught it, and stood there breathing with both hands on the desk and his head down. Nora was already out of the chair. Look at me, she said, moving to him, clinical and fast. Aldrich, look at me. He looked up. His face had changed a slight blankness at the left margin, a minimal asymmetry she hadn't been able to see from across the room, but could see clearly now. His left pupil was slightly larger than his right. Not a tremor episode. Not a medication interaction. When did you last eat? She said. This morning. Early. Before or after you took anything for pain? I haven't taken anything since yesterday. He was looking at his left hand, which was shaking steadily now, the whole arm involved. What's happening? Your blood pressure is probably elevated from stress and poor sleep, and the physical load of what you've been doing for the last several hours, she said, keeping her voice even and communicative rather than alarmed. Combined with the neurological baseline I'm seeing, you are at risk of a hypertensive event. I need to sit you down. I'm not sitting down, Aldrich. I am not sitting down in front of my people, he said, through his teeth, and it was the most human thing she had heard him say since she walked into this building. Because it was the specific humiliation of a commander who had been the strongest person in every room he had occupied for his entire adult life, facing the particular indignity of a body that had decided to stop cooperating. Then lean on the desk, she said, and talk to me. That's all. Just keep talking to me. He leaned on the desk. She checked his pulse at the wrist. She needed a cuff and a proper kit, none of which she had, and found it elevated and slightly irregular, confirming what she could read from the externals. She looked at his face. The pupil asymmetry was real and present. The left side facial droop, minimal but visible, suggested that whatever was happening neurologically had moved to a new phase. This was no longer theoretical. I need to get you medical support, she said. There is a medical team on the perimeter. I can have someone inside in 7 minutes. Who? No one else comes in, he said. His voice was still controlled, but there was an effort behind the control that hadn't been there before. That was my condition. That was your condition before I knew what was happening to you, she said. Your condition has changed. My conditions haven't. She looked at him. He looked back at her, and in his face she could read the particular stubbornness of someone who has held a position for so long that the position has become structural, something the rest of the self is built around, something that cannot be modified without everything else shifting. In her earpiece, Okafor's voice, Voss. We have movement on the north face. One of Payne's operatives just moved to a window on level 2, east corridor. Can't tell what he's doing. What's your status? She touched her collar. Payne is with me. There's a developing medical situation. Hold your position. Define developing medical situation. Neurological event in progress. I need time. A pause that lasted exactly as long as it took Okafor to decide something. You have 10 minutes, he said. Then I need an update, or I am changing my posture. 10 minutes. She looked at Payne. He was still leaning on the desk, still holding himself upright by will more than body, his left arm beginning to pull toward his torso in the involuntary way of a limb, losing its voluntary override. Aldrich, she said, dropping the clinical register, just talking. Listen to me. What is happening in your body right now is not going to wait for us to finish our conversation. The device trigger in your left hand, you told one of your operatives, you're holding it manually? His eyes came to her. He had not told her that, which meant she had gotten it from somewhere else, which meant she had resources he hadn't fully mapped. Yes, he said. Show me, she said. He lifted his left hand from the desk. In his palm, held between his second and third fingers, with his thumb locked over it, was a wireless transmitter, small, industrial grade, the kind used in mining and construction applications. A dead man's switch configuration, pressure released, signal sent. She looked at his fingers. The tremor was moving through them in waves. How long have you been holding that? She said. Since 340, he said. That was over 6 hours. The math was not complicated. A hand already compromised by progressive neurological symptoms, holding a pressure trigger for 6+ hours under physical and psychological stress, now entering an acute event that was stripping away voluntary muscle control layer by layer. He knew it. She could see that he knew it. He was looking at his own hand with the expression of a man watching an outcome he cannot alter. Aldrich, she said, I need you to tell me the transmitter frequency. No. I need bomb disposal to get into this building, and that means… No, he said, and his voice broke slightly on the word, not from emotion, but from the physical effort of producing it clearly. They come in, I lose control of this. Everything I planned for 4 years goes. It's already gone, she said, not because of them. Because of what's happening in your left hand right now. She moved closer. You came here to make me understand what Watershed cost you. I understand it. I am standing here telling you that I understand it, and that you were owed an explanation that you never received, and that the people responsible for the failure that killed your team were not me and were not your own choices. She watched his face. You did not come here to kill 23 people who work in a government processing center. I know you didn't, because if you had wanted to do that, it would already be done. He was breathing harder. She could see the effort in his chest. What I can't control, he said, his voice very low now, is whether my hand… I know, she said. That's why we're talking about the transmitter. If I give you the frequency, it's over. If you don't give me the frequency, she said, and your hand seizes, it's also over, and it ends a different way. The building was very quiet around them. Down the corridor, 23 people were sitting in a room with no windows. In the walls, devices she couldn't see were waiting for a signal that a man's failing hand was the only thing currently preventing. Payne looked at his left hand. His left hand shook back. There's something you need to know, he said. His voice had gone very strange, still controlled, but with a quality underneath of someone talking's underneath it, of something they have been holding for a long time and are only now allowing themselves to say. I wasn't just the field commander in that compound. She waited. Dunbar, he said, the 24-year-old. I recruited him. I convinced him to take the contract when he was going to leave the field entirely. He had an offer to go private security, low risk, good money. He stopped, steadied himself. I told him the experience would be worth it. I'd look out for him. She didn't say anything. He was in the first corridor when your team breached. His jaw worked. He was in the first corridor because I positioned him there. Positioned him there because it was the most defensible point, and I put my best people in the most defensible points because that's how you protect a position. Aldrich, I put him there, he said. And 4 years of telling myself it was your fault, and the agency's fault, and the intelligence failure's fault, and all of that is true. All of it is true. But I put him in that corridor. His left hand was shaking hard now. I have been so angry at you for so long, because being angry at you was easier than knowing that. The tremor in his hand spiked. She saw it before it happened, the leading edge of an acute episode. The tremor converting from rhythmic to arrhythmic, the fingers beginning to lose their coordinated hold. She moved without deciding to move, the same way she had moved in room 7, when Gerald Ott's monitors finally caught up to what she had already known. She got both hands around his left hand in the moment before his grip failed. Her left hand closed around the transmitter from below, her fingers interlacing with his, taking the pressure load. Her right hand wrapped around his fist from above, stabilizing. She could feel the tremor running through his hand into hers, irregular, strong, the kind of muscle event that didn't respond to will. She absorbed it, held. Don't let go, she said. I have it. Don't let go yet. His breath came out in a long, ragged exhale. He looked down at their hands, hers, around his, both of them holding the thing that was holding the building together. I've got it, she said again, lower. You can breathe. In her earpiece, Okafor's voice came through sharp and immediate. Voss. I have eyes on the east corridor window, and I'm looking at 2 people who appear to be what the hell is happening up there. She didn't answer him immediately. She was watching Payne's face and watching her own hands and feeling the transmitter between their interlocked fingers, and she was thinking about all the things that were simultaneously true in this moment, that Payne was in medical crisis, that the building was wired, that 23 people were 60 feet down the corridor, that Okafor had a 12-person tactical team staged 2 blocks east, that her left hand was the only thing between the current situation and a version of it that ended in a way she could not allow. Then Payne's operative opened the door. The man from the stairwell base he had come up, and he was standing in the doorway of the supervisor's office looking at the scene inside, and his face was going through a rapid and unstable sequence of expressions as he processed what he was seeing, and his hand was moving to his weapon. "Don't," Nora said, and her voice came out with a quality she hadn't used in 3 years, the specific register of a voice that has given orders in situations where orders not followed had immediate and irreversible consequences. "Do not move your hand another inch." The operative stopped. She held his gaze. She held Payne's hand. She held the transmitter. "Tell him," she said to Payne quietly. Payne looked at his operative. Something passed between them, the particular communication of 2 people who have worked together long enough that some things don't need to be spoken in full. "Stand down, Mercer," Payne said. The operative's hand came away from his weapon. Slowly. He was still staring at the 2 of them, at the locked hands, at the transmitter visible between their fingers, and he was understanding what he was looking at. Nora saw it land on him the full picture of what was happening in this room. And in the moment that Mercer stepped back from the door, and she thought the immediate crisis had moved back 1 degree from its edge, her right hand, which had been pressing against Payne's fist from above to stabilize. The tremor load felt something she had not anticipated. A second transmitter, smaller, pressed flat against the inside of Payne's forearm, held there by an adhesive strip. A backup trigger she had not seen when she came in, that had not been visible, that had been there the whole time. Her mind ran the implication in about a half second. If his arm seized fully and the forearm muscles contracted, the pressure against the adhesive strip would change. Enough change in the right direction would actuate the second trigger without anyone needing to make a decision at all. She looked up at Payne. He looked at her hand on his forearm. And in his eyes was the particular expression of a man who has just realized that the plan he built over 4 years had a flaw he hadn't seen, that the flaw was inside his own body, and that the woman he brought here to confront was now the only person in the building who knew exactly where all the pieces were. The second transmitter changed everything and nothing at the same time. Nora's right hand was already against Payne's forearm. She hadn't moved it, hadn't reacted visibly, because reacting visibly in the next 10 seconds would tell Mercer in the doorway that something had shifted, and Mercer's hands was 6 inches from. A weapon in his face was still running the math on what he was looking at. She kept her expression neutral and her body still, and let the information settle into the part of her mind that processed tactical problems. The part that had not had a serious workout in 3 years and was now running at full capacity. Primary trigger, her left hand interlaced with Payne's right. She had pressure control on that one. Secondary trigger, adhesive mounted on Payne's left forearm, positioned against the muscle belly of the flexor group. Pressure actuated. If Payne's forearm went into sustained flexion, which was exactly what happened during a generalized tremor spike or a full myoclonic event, the muscle contraction would press the device against the adhesive strip with sufficient force to change its state. She had one hand on the primary and one hand on the forearm that housed the secondary, which meant she was, in this moment, the only thing between both triggers and whatever they were connected to. Problem was that she had 2 hands, and Payne's body was going to keep deteriorating, regardless of how many hands she had. "Mercer," she said, keeping her voice at the same register she had, to stop him at the door, not loud, not soft. The register that communicated that the person speaking had already decided what was going to happen and was informing rather than asking. "Come in and close the door." Mercer looked at Payne. "Do it," Payne said. The door closed. The 3 of them were alone in the supervisor's office. Nora, with both hands on Payne's, the transmitter between their interlaced fingers on one side and the secondary device warm against her palm on the other. Payne, leaning against the desk with his body doing things, his will was no longer fully governing. Mercer, standing near the door, with his hand away from his weapon because his commander had told him to stand down. And Mercer was the kind of operative who followed that order even when every instinct he had was telling him to do something. Mercer, Nora said. How long has the commander's hand been shaking? Pause. Mercer looked at Payne. Payne said nothing. 3 weeks, Mercer said. Maybe a little more. Has he lost grip on anything during that time? Another pause, longer. The pause of someone deciding how much loyalty required concealment and concluding that the answer was less than he'd thought. A radio handset. 2 weeks ago. He picked it up again fast. I didn't think... It's fine, Nora said. I need you to do something for me, and I need you to understand that it is the only thing that matters in this room right now. Are you listening? Mercer looked at her with the expression of a man who has walked into a situation he didn't see coming and is now processing faster than he would like. Yes, I need you to open the channel on your radio to the team outside. Federal team. Commander Okafor. No, Payne said. Aldrich. She used the particular quality of voice that she had used in 100 acute rooms with 100 people who were frightened and in pain and fighting the help they needed. Your left forearm is going to flex in the next few minutes, whether you want it to or not. You know that. I know that. And you know what happens when it does. He looked at their hands, at his forearm under her palm. The secondary device, she said, was your contingency. I understand why you built it. But your body has moved outside the parameters you planned for, and the contingency is now the primary risk. She felt his forearm tremor beneath her hand, not spiking yet, but building, the way a vibration builds before it converts to motion. Let me bring someone in who can help me manage this physically while we talk about how to end it. That's all. One person. One person turns into 12, he said. Not if you tell your team to hold position, she said. Your people are still in this building. Mercer is in this room. Still have control of this situation. But you need to make a decision in the next 2 minutes, because after that, the decision gets made for you. The room was very quiet. Somewhere in the building, a door opened and closed one of his team, moving between positions. The ordinary sounds of a structure that was full of people waiting. Payne looked at Mercer. Open the channel, he said. Mercer unclipped the radio from his vest and extended it. Nora couldn't take her hands off Payne to hold it, so she nodded at Mercer to hold it near her face. She turned her head toward it. Okafor, she said. His voice came back immediately. He had been waiting. She could hear it in the single word of his response. Voss, I need one person in the building. Medical. Someone who can follow instruction. Not tactical, not armed. She glanced at Payne. Payne has confirmed this. One person. A pause of approximately 4 seconds, which was how long it took Okafor to run the calculation. Who do you want? You have an EMT or a paramedic on the perimeter. Paramedic. Rourke. Send Rourke in through the north entrance. Tell him to come to level 2. Supervisor's office is at the end of the east corridor, and to bring everything he has for blood pressure management and neurological stabilization. She paused. And Okafor. Tell your tactical team to stand down completely. Not reduced posture. Down. If Payne's people see movement on the perimeter, this gets harder. Another pause. Copy, Okafor said. Rourke is moving. 7 minutes. She looked at Payne. 7 minutes. He nodded once, the small nod of a man who has conceded something he cannot afford to regret. She used the 7 minutes. Not to negotiate, there was time for that. Or there wasn't, and she would find out which but to talk. Because talking was doing something, and doing something was keeping Payne's attention in the room rather than in the 4 years of architecture he had built inside his head. And attention in the room was what kept his body from spiking into the acute event she could feel building under her palm. She asked Tim about his team. Not Mercer. Specifically, she could read Mercer, but the others. How long they'd been with him. Whether they knew the full picture of what they were here for, or whether they had come in on a narrower brief. Payne talked. Not freely. He was not a man who talked freely under any circumstances, but in the compressed, factual way of someone who had been alone with information for a long time and found that articulating it to another person had a different weight than carrying it in silence. His team had been with him for between 6 months and 2 years. 3 of them had their own grievances with the agency, legitimate ones, the kind that accumulate in spent in contract work, where the protections are limited and the accountability flows upward and rarely in any other direction. He had not deceived them about what they were doing, he said. They had chosen. She filed that. It was relevant for what came after, for how Okafor's people processed the team's legal situation, and she noted it without commenting on it, because commenting on it was not what this moment needed. The door opened and a man came in mid-30s, compact, carrying a jump bag that she recognized as a paramedic's advanced life support kit. He took in the room in the rapid, systematic way of someone trained for arrival into chaotic spaces, and his eyes went to the hands, Nora's interlaced with Payne's, her other hand against Payne's forearm and to Payne's face, and she could see him running the clinical read in real time. Rourke, she said. Here, he said, setting the bag on the desk beside Payne's hip. Cuff. Left arm is compromised. Use the right. I need a reading, and I need to know if he's hypertensive to the point of acute risk. She looked at Payne. He's going to put a cuff on your right arm. Don't move your left. Payne said nothing, which was consent. Rourke moved efficiently. She had worked with worse paramedics, and she had worked with better. But Rourke had the quality she valued most in a pre-hospital provider, which was that he did the thing he was doing and did not require management while doing it. Cuff went on. He pumped it, released it, read it. His eyes came to hers. 174 over 106, he said, with the flatness of someone communicating a number that speaks for itself. High. Not stroke range, but high enough that combined with the neurological picture she was seeing, the risk window was narrow. Do you have labetalol in that bag? Yes. What's your protocol for hypertensive urgency without confirmed stroke workup? Oral or IV? He won't sit for an IV, she said. Oral. Rourke looked at Payne with the professional neutrality of someone who has assessed and accepted the parameters of a situation. He pulled a medication bottle from the bag. 200 milligrams. Takes 30 to 40 minutes to show effect. Give it to him, she said. Payne looked at the tablet Rourke held out. It's a blood pressure medication, Nora said. It does one thing. It will not sedate you. It will not affect your cognition. It will not... I know what labetalol is, Payne said, and took the tablet from Rourke and swallowed it without water in the practiced way of someone accustomed to field medicine under suboptimal conditions. She looked at Rourke. Stay in this room. Do not leave this room for any reason without telling me first. Understood, he said, and stepped back to give them space, opening his bag quietly and beginning to organize what he had in the way of someone making themselves useful in the background, which was exactly right. She turned back to Payne. His color had not improved. That would take the medication time she didn't fully have. But something in his face had shifted. Quality of his attention had changed. The arrival of Rourke, the medication, the concrete management of the physical situation, had moved something in him. She had seen it before, the particular shift that happened when someone in crisis encountered a response that was competent and direct and not punitive. Didn't resolve anything. But it changed the atmosphere of the problem. Aldrich, she said, I need to ask you something, and I need you to give me an honest answer. He looked at her. Your team, she said. The 6 people in this building. When you planned this, did you plan an exit for them? The silence that followed was not the silence of someone thinking about how to answer. It was the silence of someone who had arrived at a question they had been avoiding for longer than the conversation they were currently having. I planned an exit for the hostages, he said. She held his gaze. That's not what I asked. He looked at his left hand at their hands, interlocked the transmitter between them. I planned this to end with me, he said. The others, I told them there was an exit protocol, a route out before the resolution point. Is there a route? A long pause. There's a corridor on the north face that my team doesn't know is unmonitored, he said. Cleared it before we came in. 3 hours ago, I told Mercer the route was still viable. Is it? I don't know, he said. I stopped checking at 600. She looked at Mercer, who had been standing at the door, processing this at a speed she could read on his face. He was not a stupid man. She had determined that in the first 40 seconds, and what he was processing was the specific understanding that the commander he had followed into this building had planned his own ending without fully planning theirs. Mercer, she said, do you have a way to contact the rest of your team simultaneously? Earpiece, he said. His voice had a quality it hadn't had 10 minutes ago, flat, recalibrated. I'm going to ask you to do something, she said, and I'm going to ask you to decide whether to do it based on what you know, not on the order structure you came in here with. Can you do that? He looked at Payne. Payne was looking at the floor. Yes, Mercer said. Tell your team to move the hostages to the ground floor lobby, she said. Not the north entrance, the central lobby, away from the stairwell device. Tell them to position the hostages against the interior wall, seated, and tell them to stand down their own weapons and step back from the hostage group. Mercer was quiet for a moment. They'll want to know why. Tell them the commander ordered it, she said. Because he did. She looked at Payne. Payne raised his chin slightly. The nod was small, and it cost him something. She could see that, but it was unambiguous. Mercer keyed his earpiece and began talking in a low, specific voice, relaying some instruction in the clipped language of people who communicate in operational shorthand. She listened to his side of it, the brief pushback from at least one of the team, Mercer overriding it, the acknowledgement. It took 90 seconds. They're moving, he said. Turned back to Payne. The transmitter frequencies, she said. Primary and secondary. I need them. If I give you those. If you give me those, she said, bomb disposal can begin clearing the building. Your team walks out through the north corridor you identified. The hostages go out the central lobby. You get medical attention that I cannot provide in this room. She kept her voice direct. Not warm, not cold. Real. And this ends as something other than what you originally planned it to end as. What happens to my team? He said. I don't know the exact outcome, she said, because lying to him at this point would be the worst possible tactical and moral error she could make. They will be arrested. Charges will depend on what the prosecutors decide, and I cannot control that. What I can tell you is that 6 people walking out of this building alive is a different conversation than 6 people who didn't walk out. Quiet. His forearm was trembling steadily under her hand. And me, he said. Same answer, she said. I won't tell you what I can't guarantee. But you're having a hypertensive event, a building with no medical imaging equipment. And I am a nurse holding your hand and trying to keep you from triggering your own devices. The immediate answer to what happens to you is that you need a hospital. She paused. Which I happen to know something about. Something moved in his face. It was not a smile. It was too small and too complicated for that. But it was in the neighborhood of something that had once been capable of becoming one. He told her the frequencies. She relayed them to Okafor, with her face turned toward Mercer's radio. Both hands still occupied. Her voice steady and specific. 2 frequencies, primary and secondary. The device manufacturer series, as Payne described it. The trigger mechanism type. She heard Okafor pass it to bomb disposal in the background, heard the change in the ambient sound of the command channel as people began to move. Voss, Okafor said. Hostages are confirming movement to the lobby. We have visual through the ground floor east window. Counting them now. North corridor, she said. Payne's team exits through there. It should be unmonitored. They are not armed threat. At this time, they've been ordered to stand down. Pause. I have people on the north face. Pull them back 20 meters and let the corridor exit clear, she said. They come out, they're met, they're detained. No engagement unless they initiate. Another pause longer. Copy, Okafor said. North face pulling back. She looked at Mercer. Go, she said. Get your people out. Merce looked at Payne. The look between them was long and had things in it that she didn't have the context for, and didn't need the particular communication between two people at the end of something they had been in together. I'll tell them you ordered it, Mercer said. Do that, Payne said. Mercer left. The door closed. The room was very quiet. Rourke was at the edge of her peripheral vision, monitoring without intruding, which was the right thing to be doing. Payne was leaning against the desk with his left arm tremoring under her hand, and his right hand still interlaced with hers around the primary transmitter, and the medication was working on a timeline that was not within her ability to accelerate. She had bought the building time. She had bought Payne time. What she had not yet fully resolved was the physical reality of two triggers, two hands, one body that was increasingly outside voluntary control, and a transition that needed to happen between the current state and a state where disposal could enter the building and she could release her grip without consequence. Rourke, she said, here, in your bag. Do you have a tensor bandage or equivalent compression wrap? Yes. And a hard splint, even a SAM splint, yes. I need you to come to my left side, and I need you to prepare to immobilize Payne's forearm from wrist to mid-humerus. I am going to talk you through the placement. The goal is to restrict flexion of the forearm muscles without restricting circulation. She looked at Payne. This will limit the secondary trigger's activation range. Payne looked at his forearm. At the small device adhered to its inner surface. It'll still trigger if the splint presses. The splint will hold the forearm in a neutral position that keeps the muscle belly away from the device surface, she said. The flexion we're preventing. Neutral position, the pressure differential, is insufficient to actuate. He was quiet for a moment, running it. He had enough medical background to check her logic, and she knew it and had known it when she said it. Okay, he said. Rourke moved to her left with the materials. She talked him through it, the neutral forearm position, the padding over the device site to create a barrier layer that would hold the forearm surface away from the transmitter without pressing it, the splint placement, and the compression wrap tension. Rourke's hands were good. He worked without asking unnecessary questions, which was the primary virtue she needed from him right now. Took 6 minutes. When they were done, Payne's left forearm was immobilized in a neutral position, with the device site padded and separated from the risk of myoclonic contact. It was not a perfect solution. It was the solution available in the room they were in. Kept her right hand, with his right hand around the primary transmitter. That one required a different approach, and she knew what the approach was. And she also knew it was going to require something from Payne that he had not yet fully arrived at. Bomb disposal is in the building, Okafor's voice said in her earpiece. Ground floor. They're working from the lobby device, outward. How long for full clearance? Lead tech says 40 minutes minimum. Could be more depending on what they find. 40 minutes. She looked at Payne. His blood pressure was not going to wait 40 minutes without doing something one way or another. And she could not stand here for 40 minutes holding his hand. And more to the point, she was not sure his hand was going to remain controllable for 40 minutes. Rourke, she said. Pulse check right wrist. Rourke checked. 88. Still elevated, but coming down. The medication was beginning to work. Slowly, but working. She looked at Payne's face. His color was fractionally better, the quality of his attention slightly more present than it had been 15 minutes ago. The tremor in his left arm was dampened by the splint. The primary transmitter in their interlaced hands was steady. She needed to explain to him what came next. Not obscure it, not build to it, just say it directly. Because he had earned the directness and because the alternative was a version of what he had spent 4 years being given, which was information managed and shaped by people who had decided what he needed to know. When bomb disposal clears the ground floor device, she said, they can enter the stairwell. When they clear the stairwell, they can reach this floor. When they reach this floor, I need to transfer the primary trigger to a disposal unit that can safely manage the signal. She paused. That means I need to release your hand, and you need to release the transmitter. He looked at their hands. I can't guarantee what happens to you after that, she said. I told you I wouldn't say things I can't back up. But I can tell you that the outcome for you is better if you hand it over than if I'm still holding your hand when your blood pressure does something we can't manage in this room. He was quiet for a long moment. Outside the building, she could hear nothing, which meant Okafor's team was holding position correctly. The perimeter was stable. The North Corridor exit had been managed without incident because she hadn't heard anything to the contrary in her earpiece. The analyst, Payne said, the one responsible. Is there a name? She looked at him. I don't know the name. Could you find it? She held his gaze. I don't know, she said honestly. The investigation file is classified. But I can tell you that the finding is documented. The identity is on record, and it does not disappear because you are no longer in a position to pursue it yourself. Records are records. I want it on record, he said. That I asked. I'll make sure of it, she said. He looked at their hands one more time. Could feel his pulse through the contact, still elevated, but less arrhythmic than it had been. The tremor in his left arm was contained. His face had the quality of someone who has arrived at the end of something, not the way he planned to arrive at it, but arrived nonetheless. Then Okafor's voice came through the earpiece with a change in it she had not been expecting. Voss, I need you to listen to me very carefully. Quality of his voice was different, not alarm, which would have been one thing, but a controlled urgency that was worse than alarm, because it meant he was managing something he hadn't previously disclosed at first. Bomb disposal found a fourth device, he said. It's not on the schematics we had. It's in the level 2 to electrical room, which is 4 doors from your current position. And it's on a separate trigger system, not connected to either of the frequencies Payne gave us. Kept her face still. The fourth device has a timer, Okafor said. Tech says it was set before we were given the other frequencies. It was always going to run on its own. A pause. Voss. It has 11 minutes on it. She looked at Payne, and in his face she saw something she had not seen there before, not guilt, not calculation, but the specific expression of a man confronting the fact that the plan he had built had a component he was no longer in control of, because the version of himself who had built it had planned for a different ending than the one he was now standing in. And the machinery of that original ending was still running on its own schedule, regardless of what he had decided in the last hour. Aldrich, she said, tell me about the fourth device. He looked at the floor. Aldrich. When he looked up, his face had the particular quality of a man who has run out of the thing he was using to hold himself together. I said it before I brought the team in, he said. Before any of this. I said it as he stopped, steadied, as the final option. For me, not for them. I told Mercer there was an exit. I wasn't lying about that. I was going to make sure they were out before. Before 11 minutes, she said. Yes. Where is the deactivation, she said. The manual override. He looked at her. Every timed device has a manual override, she said. Where is it? The electrical room, he said. Panel 7. There's a physical cutoff switch behind the secondary breaker. But his left arm moved under the splint, a full deep tremor that the immobilization dampened, but did not stop. Panel is locked. The key is on my right keyring. his right hand, the hand that was interlaced with hers around the primary transmitter. The hand she could not release until bomb disposal reached them. She looked at Rourke. Rourke was already looking at her. He had been listening to everything, which she had allowed and intended, and his face had the expression of someone running the same math she was running, and arriving at the same answer. 10 minutes and 40 seconds. Okafor, Nora said into the radio. I need bomb disposal on level 2 in the next 4 minutes. Not 10. 4. They're still working the stairwell device. Pull one tech off the stairwell and send them to the level 2 electrical room. Panel 7. There is a physical cutoff switch behind the secondary breaker. The room is locked. She looked at Payne's right hand, at their interlaced fingers, at the transmitter between them. I need the stairwell tech to reach us first so I can transfer the primary trigger. Then the electrical room. That sequence. 4 minutes. Pause that was too long. The stairwell device is not fully rendered safe. Okafor. She kept her voice at exactly the level it needed to be, not louder than the situation, not quieter. If the stairwell tech stops work at the current stage and moves, what is the risk window on the stairwell device? Could hear him consulting with someone. Tech says the device is in a stable, partial render state. Moving now increases risk by what is the risk window? Low to moderate if nobody touches it in the next 20 minutes. Then the tech moves, she said. Now, please. The please was not a softener. It was the acknowledgement that she was asking him to make a call that was his to make, not hers, and that she understood the difference. She heard Okafor breathe. She heard him make the call. Tech is moving, he said. 3 to 4 minutes. She looked at Rourke. Timer on your watch. Start now. Rourke clicked his watch. Running. She looked at Payne. His face was the face of a man sitting at the bottom of something he had dug himself, looking up at the distance between where he was and where the surface was, and calculating whether he had the resources to make that climb. He was leaning harder against the desk than he had been 10 minutes ago. The medication was working on his blood pressure. Rourke had confirmed that with a second reading 2 minutes earlier, 161/98, trending in the right direction, but trending in the right direction was not the same as being out of the risk window. And his body was running on 6 hours of sustained stress and no sleep and a neurological process that was not going to pause for any of this. The device in the electrical room, she said. You built it before you brought your team in. Yes. Before Mercer. Before any of them. Yes. So when you told them there was an exit protocol, she said, you meant it. You built the exit for them, before you built the exit for yourself. He looked at her. Yes. She held that for a moment, not to judge it, but to understand it, because understanding it was part of managing the next 4 minutes, and part of managing everything that came after. A man who had planned his own ending had still, in that planning, made sure the people who followed him had a way to walk away. That was not nothing. It was not a redemption, not in any clean sense. But it was something true about who he was underneath 4 years of accumulated damage. She noted it the way she noted everything clinically relevant, without sentiment and without dismissal. Rourke, she said, 2 minutes 30. 2:32, he confirmed. She looked at the door. Bomb disposal's tech would come through that door, and when they did, she needed to execute the transfer cleanly and without hesitation, because hesitation in a transfer of a live trigger was how things went wrong in the final moment after everything else had gone right. She had run the mechanics of it in her head twice, and she knew the sequence. Her left hand maintained pressure on the primary transmitter. The tech's hand came in from below. She guided their grip into position. She transferred the load. She released. Clean, sequential, unambiguous. The complication was Payne. Not his body was managed as well as it could be managed in this room. The complication was what happened to Payne in the moment she released his hand, because that moment was a kind of ending, and endings had weight. and the weight of this one was not something she could leave unaddressed and walk out of the room, expecting a stable outcome. "Aldrich," she said. He looked at her. After this, she said, "You are going to be arrested. You know that." "Yes." "Your team is already in custody outside, Mercer included." "I know. And you're going to need a hospital before you're going to need anything else." She kept her eyes on his. "But I need you to hear something before the next 2 minutes happen. Not because it makes what you did acceptable, it doesn't, and you know it doesn't. And I think the part of you that was most like the person you were before Wateredge has known that for a while." She paused. "But what you came here for being heard, having someone acknowledge what was taken from you, having the actual story of what happened put on record, that happened. It happened in this room, and the people responsible for the intelligence failure that killed Dunbar and Harwick and the others are documented. The record exists. It doesn't disappear." He said nothing. Jaw was tight. "You don't have to forgive anything," she said. "I'm not asking you to. I'm asking you to stay in the room. Stay present for what comes next instead of what you originally planned." A long silence. Rourke's watch was counting somewhere at the edge of her hearing. "Dunbar's family," Payne said. "His parents. They never received any explanation either." "I know," she said. "I'll make sure Callum is aware that the classified finding needs a legal review for disclosure to next of kin. Can't guarantee the outcome, but I will make sure it's a conversation that happens." He looked at her for a long moment. "Why would you do that?" "Because it's the right thing," she said, "and because you asked." Footsteps in the corridor. The door opened and a bomb disposal technician came through, young, female, in a partial blast suit with the helmet visor up, carrying a containment unit roughly the size of a shoebox. She took in the room in one sweep, and her eyes went directly to Nora's hands, which was correct. "Voss?" she said. "Here," Nora said. "The primary trigger is a dead man's switch configuration, currently held between my left hand and his right. The secondary is immobilized on his left forearm, splinted, padded, activation threshold, currently insufficient. I need you to take the primary." "Understood." The tech moved to Nora's left and set the containment unit on the desk. She opened it, a foam-lined interior with a recessed cavity sized for a transmitter of roughly the dimensions Nora was holding. The tech's hands came in low, below Nora's, and she guided them into position with quiet, specific direction. Index, finger here. Thumb here. Maintain even downward pressure. Do not close your grip until I tell you. "Ready," the tech said. "On 3, Nora said. 1, 2, 3. The transfer happened in approximately 1 second. The tech's hands assumed the pressure load. Nora felt the transmitter leave her grip. She held still for a half beat, confirming the tech had it cleanly, and then she withdrew her hands and stepped back, and the tech moved the transmitter directly into the containment unit's recessed cavity and closed the lid with a mechanical click that was one of the more satisfying sounds Nora had heard in recent memory. "Primary secured," the tech said into her own radio. Nora turned to Rourke. "How long?" 1 minute 40, on the timer. "The electrical room," she said to the tech. "Panel 7. I need the cutoff switch." Payne the key. Payne reached with his right hand, now free, into his left vest pocket and produced a key ring. His right hand was not steady, but it was functional. He worked the correct key off the ring, a flathead utility key, the kind used in government building electrical panels, and held it out. Nora took it. "Rourke, stay with him," she said. "Do not leave him." She went out the door at a pace that was not a run, but was everything just short of one. The corridor was empty. The hostages had been moved. The operatives were out. The building had a particular hollow quality of a space recently vacated. Counted doors. 4 from the supervisor's office. The electrical room door was gray metal with a standard government access label. She put the key in the lock. It stuck. She pulled the key slightly back, rotated it a half degree, applied pressure. The lock turned. Inside, a narrow room, warm, smelling of electrical conduit and metal, banks of breakers on both walls, conduit running floor to ceiling. Scanned for the panel numbering. 1, 2 on the far wall. 7. She found it, found the secondary breaker, pulled the breaker panel cover. Behind it, a physical cutoff switch, a heavy-duty throw type, currently in the armed position. She threw it. The switch moved with a resistance that told her the device had been professionally installed. This was not improvised, not amateur work. This was the work of someone who knew exactly what they were doing and had done it while planning never to be here when it resolved. The switch hit the cutoff position and locked. She stood in the electrical room for exactly 3 seconds with her hand on the switch. Then she keyed the radio. Okafor, timer device is manually cut off. Level 2 electrical room, panel 7. Bomb disposal needs to confirm and remove. Pause. Then Okafor's voice, and something in it she had not heard before, a quality that was not quite relief, because commanders did not allow themselves relief mid-operation, but its structural cousin. Copy. Tech is heading to you now. Voss. I'm going back to my patient, she said, and went back down the corridor. Payne was where she had left him, which was to say leaning against the desk, with Rourke monitoring vitals, and the splinted left arm resting on the desk's surface. He had not fallen. He had not tried to do anything. He was sitting with the particular stillness of someone who is regent of a long road, the end of a long road, and does not yet know what the terrain looks like on the other side of it. She came back into the room and stood in front of him. It's done, she said. He looked at her. He looked at his left arm. He looked at his right hand, which was still not steady, but was his again, in a way it hadn't been for the last several hours. He said nothing. There was nothing to say that the room wasn't already saying. Rourke looked at her over Payne's head and gave her a small nod that communicated several things efficiently. Vitals were stable enough, the immediate medical crisis was managed, and the man in front of her needed a hospital and an IV and a neurologist in roughly that order. She nodded back. Okafor's voice came through the earpiece. Hostages are clearing the lobby. We have 26 total, 3 more than the confirmed count. They were in a secondary room. All ambulatory, no critical injuries. We have 2 with elevated blood pressure and 1 with a suspected panic attack. All manageable. A pause. Payne's team, 6 operatives in custody at the North Corridor exit. No engagement. Mercer cooperated with the detaining officers. Good, she said. Nora. It was the first time Okafor had used her first name. The shift in register was small, but she registered it. I need you and Payne on the ground floor when you're able to move him. 5 minutes, she said. He needs to be on a gurney, not walking. We'll have one at the lobby entrance. She looked at Payne. Can you hear that? Yes, he said. Then you know what happens next. He looked at her for a long moment. His face was tired in the way that faces get tired when the thing that has been holding them taut for years has finally let go, and what's underneath it is just a person imperfect, damaged, wrong in specific and significant ways, but a person. I didn't know about the 4th device being a problem, he said. I want you to know that. I knew it was there. I didn't know it would become. I didn't think it would still be running by the time we got to... I know, she said. That's not an excuse. I know that too, she said. They moved him out carefully. Rourke supported his right side, Nora his left, and they took the stairwell slowly because the elevator was not something she was willing to test in a building that bomb disposal had not yet fully cleared. The stairwell device was exactly where Okafor's team had said visible at the base, rendered in partial state. A disposal tech crouched beside it who looked up at them as they passed and gave a single nod that communicated that the device was stable and they could continue. The lobby opened around them as they came off the last stair. Light was coming in through the exterior glass. Now the morning had moved on while she was upstairs, and the quality of it was different, fuller, the particular light of a day that had been going for several hours without her. The hostages were gone. The lobby smelled like people who had been frightened in a closed space for a long time. Outside the central lobby doors, the perimeter had shifted. Vehicles had moved. Medical units were present that hadn't been there when she went in. She could see, through the glass, the cluster of people in tactical gear and the separate cluster of people in medical vests, and in between them, a gurney that Okafor had promised. Callum was standing at the entrance. She saw Nora come through the doors, and something moved in her expression, not surprise, which it had moved past, but something more complicated. The expression of someone who had made a bet on a judgment call and was now watching the outcome of it in real time. They transferred Payne to the gurney. He lay back without an argument, which told her more about how he was feeling than anything he had said in the last 40 minutes. Rourke passed his vitals to the paramedic, who took over, speaking quickly and specifically the handoff language of medical professionals. Nora stepped back. Okafor appeared at her left side. She had not heard him approach, which was a testament to the particular situational tunnel had been in for the last several hours, because Okafor was not a quiet man in the way he carried himself. He looked at her. She looked at him. 26 people, he said. Yes, she said. All of them walking. Yes. He was quiet for a moment. Not a comfortable quiet, the quiet of someone recalibrating something they had thought was set. I owe you something, he said. You don't, she said. You made the right calls when it mattered. I made the right calls after I made the wrong one, he said. The wrong one was this morning, when Callum told me who they were sending in, and I said, he stopped. What I said is on record. I'd like to say something different that's also on record. She looked at him. Is this the part where you apologize? This is the part where I acknowledge that I assessed you based on a category instead of a file, he said. And I would like it on record that the assessment was wrong. She held his gaze. Noted, she said, and meant it without drama, because the acknowledgement was not nothing, and she was not going to pretend it was. But she was also not going to perform gratitude for being correctly evaluated, because that was a different kind of problem. And she had enough of those. Callum came to her side as Okafor moved away to manage the perimeter transition. The two of them stood watching the paramedics work on Payne IV line going in. Oxygen saturation probe on his finger, someone with a blood pressure cuff, replacing the field assessment with a proper reading. The classified investigation file, Nora said to Callum. Watershed, the analyst. I told Payne the record existed and didn't disappear. I need that to be true. It's true, Callum said. The next of kin for the operatives killed in the breach Dunbar, Harwick, and the third. They haven't received the full explanation because the finding was classified above their disclosure level. She turned to look at Callum directly. That needs to be reviewed. I understand there are legal and security considerations. I am asking you to make it a conversation that happens, rather than a file that sits. Callum looked at her for a long moment. I'll make that request formally, she said. Can't guarantee the outcome. I know. Make the request. I will. Nora looked back at Payne. The paramedics had him stable, better color, IV running, oxygen sat coming up. He was looking at the sky, which was what you looked at when you were on your back on a gurney and didn't have anywhere else to look. She watched him look at it. She thought about what he was thinking, and she thought about what she was thinking, and she thought about how those two things were not as different as she would have assumed this morning when she was standing at the sink at 5:47 a.m., running cold water over her wrists and thinking about Gerald Ott's heart rhythm. That had been today, the same day. She stood in the cold morning air of the Denton Falls Federal District and let that land on her. The next several hours were not uncomplicated. They never were after something like this. There were federal debriefers who wanted her account in sequence and in detail, and she gave it to them, all of it, clearly and specifically, without editorializing and without omission. There were medical personnel who wanted to check her over, which she submitted to without protest because she had enough practical respect for physiological reality to know that sustained adrenaline had a bill that always came due eventually. Her blood pressure was elevated, which she had expected. Her hands had a fine tremor, which she had also expected. The paramedic who checked her was professional and careful, and she did not tell him. She had been a combat medic for 8 years because it was not relevant, and because she had found that telling people things like that in context where they were trying to help you tended to shift the dynamic in ways that made the help less effective. Callum sat with her during part of the debrief and provided context when the federal examiners needed operational background that Nora didn't have access to. Okafor came through at one point to provide his own account, and at the point where his account intersected with hers, told the examiners exactly what he had told her outside the building, that he had underestimated her on the basis of category, and that the record should reflect this. She heard him say it, and she kept her eyes on her own hands and did not look at him, because the moment required its own dignity and she was not going to complicate it with a reaction. Payne was transported by ambulance to Denton Falls General, not Callaway, which was across the city, and placed under federal medical custody. The diagnosis that emerged over the following 24 hours was one she had already begun to map in the supervisor's office. Early-stage Parkinson's, likely onset 18 to 24 months prior. Tremor progressive, and the neurological picture consistent with the left-sided presentation she had observed. The thoracic injury from watershed had masked the early symptoms, the nerve damage, and the Parkinson's tremor had similar surface presentations. And an assumption that the tremor was scar tissue related had gone unchallenged by the medical personnel managing his discharge care, who were not the medical personnel who should have been managing it. She thought about that for a while, about the way assumptions compound, about the way one wrong assessment gets built into the foundation of the next one and the next, until the structure looks solid from the outside and everything inside it is organized around something that was never true. She thought about Garrett. She went back to Callaway General at 4:30 in the afternoon. She had not been asked to go back. The shift had long since ended, replaced by the next rotation, and there was no operational reason to return that day. She went back because she had told Petra to check Gerald Ott's vitals every 30 minutes, and she wanted to know how he was. He was in the cardiac unit, now transferred up. During the morning, the cardiology consult having gone, as she had predicted it would go. He was alert, his wife in the chair beside him, the both of them having graduated from the acute phase into the slower, more considered submissive understanding what had happened, and what came next. When Nora appeared in the doorway, his wife stood up. Told us, the wife said, what happened today. In the building. It was on the news. Some of it, Nora said. Was that you, the nurse they were talking about? I was there, Nora said. The wife looked at her for a moment with the expression of someone revising their understanding of the person they had spoken to that morning, when that person had asked about medication and schedules and sat with them while the monitor alarmed. Then she crossed the room and took Nora's hand in both of hers and held it in the way people hold things they don't have words for. Nora stood still and let her. Gerald Ott, from the bed, said, I heard you flagged my condition twice, before anyone else acted on it. 3 times, technically, she said. He was quiet for a moment. Thank you, he said. For the 3rd time. She smiled. It was a small smile and a real one. Get some sleep, mister. Ott. She went back to the nurses' station. Petra was there, end of her own extended shift, charting with the particular efficiency of someone running on momentum. She looked up when Nora came in, and they looked at each other for a moment in the way of people who had known each other in a professional context for 3 years, and were now doing the recalibration that happens when a significant piece of previously unavailable information enters the picture. The news said something about a former combat medic, Petra said. They didn't use a name. They won't for a while, Nora said. Classification. Petra looked at her. How long have you? 3 years and 2 months, Nora said. Here, yes. I mean, how long have you been? The whole time, Nora said. Petra absorbed that. Garrett was in the lounge watching the news coverage when it started coming through, she said. He figured it out about the same time the federal update named Callaway General as your employer. How is he taking it? Nora said. Petra looked at her with the expression of someone selecting the most accurate word from a set of options. Quietly, she said. Nora nodded. That was probably the right response for Garrett, she thought. Not because it indicated remorse, necessarily, and not because it would change anything about how the next 3 months of working in the same building were going to feel. But because quiet was at least an acknowledgement that the noise he had been making for 3 years and 2 months had been founded on a reading of the room that was entirely, demonstrably wrong. And there was a particular silence that came with realizing you had been the loudest person in a space and had not, in fact, had the most to say. She would deal with Garrett in time. She would deal with the debrief follow-ups and the federal paperwork and the neurologist's report on pain and the classified file review and the next of kin disclosures, and every other piece of what today had put into motion in time. Not today. Today had already had enough in it. She was pulling on her coat at the locker room when her phone buzzed. Callum, she answered it. Pain is stable, Callum said without preamble. Parkinson's diagnosis is confirmed. His counsel has been retained. He will be charged with multiple federal counts: kidnapping, unlawful detention, possession and use of explosive devices, assault of a federal officer. Prosecution will be significant. I know, Nora said. The disclosure review for the watershed next of kin is formally initiated, Callum said. I made the request 2 hours ago. It will take time, but it's in the system. Thank you. A pause. I want to tell you something, Callum said. Not officially. Not for the debrief record. Go ahead. When I pulled your file this morning, Callum said, before we came to the hospital, I read the full file. The operational record, the watershed documentation, the circumstances of your departure from military service. And there was a notation in the debrief following your discharge. Your commanding officer's assessment. Nora was quiet. He wrote that you were the most capable field medic he had worked with in 22 years of service, Callum said, and that it was a loss to the service that the field had lost you. He also wrote that he understood why you left. A brief pause. Thought you should know that somebody saw it. Even then, even when it probably didn't feel that way. Nora stood in the locker room with her coat half on and her hand on the door of her locker, and she said nothing for a moment. Not because she didn't have words, but because the words that were available were not ones she particularly wanted to say out loud to a federal director she had met 14 hours ago. Some things were for inside. Okay, she said finally. Thank you for telling me. What will you do now? Callum said. Nora thought about it honestly, the way you think about questions that deserve a real answer rather than a habitual one. She thought about Gerald Ott's rhythm under her fingers at 6A. She thought about the supervisor's office and the interlocked hands and the transmitter and what it felt like to hold something that heavy and not put it down. She thought meat. She thought about Dunbar's parents, who had been living with a partial story for 4 years and were going to receive more of the truth because she had stood in a room and asked for it to happen. She thought about the 30 seconds at the sink every morning, cold water over her wrists, the calibration that happened before she went onto the floor. She had spent 3 years being the person nobody in that hospital had fully looked at. And in some ways, not always, but some, she had needed that. The hospital had been a space where she could learn to carry the weight of what she knew without being defined by it, where she could be useful in a different Pritz register, where she could find out what she was made of when the parameters were not life and death every day. Except today it had been life and death, in the hospital and outside it. and she had been exactly who she was in both places, which was the thing she had spent 3 years and 2 months finding out was possible. "I'm going back to work," she said. "Tomorrow. The day after. Same floor, same shift. After today. Because of today," she said. "I know what I am now. Both sides of it. The building and the ward, the trigger and the stethoscope. I don't have to choose between them anymore." She zipped her coat. "And there are a lot of people who come into that emergency department who need someone who knows how to hold something heavy and not drop it." Callum was quiet for a moment. "I may call you again," she said. "Professionally." "I know," Nora said. "That's fine." She ended the call and stood in the quiet of the locker room for a moment. The hospital around her was moving through its late afternoon rhythms, shift change coming, the particular energy of a day winding down, and a night beginning, the unchanging business of a place where people came when they had nowhere else to go. She walked back out onto the floor. Petra was still at the station. 2 nurses from the incoming shift were getting handoff reports. The monitors beeped their individual rhythms, all of them slightly different, the particular polyphony of a working trauma bay that was never fully quiet. Nobody stopped what they were doing when she came out. Nobody made a speech. A monitor alarmed somewhere down the hall, and one of the incoming nurses moved toward it without being asked, which was the right response. And the ordinary machinery of the floor continued in the way that it always continued. Because hospitals did not pause for the exceptional. They absorbed it and kept moving, which was maybe the truest thing about them. Nora stood at the nurse's station and pulled up the chartboard. 2 new admits since she had left. She scanned the presenting information with the practiced speed of someone looking for the details that mattered, the things between these lines of the data. Old habit. The same habit that had read Gerald Ott's pulse this morning before the monitors caught it. The same habit that had read Payne's tremor in a lobby and understood what it meant before anyone else in the building did. The same habit that had held 2 triggers in 2 hands in a room on the 2nd floor of a federal facility and not put either of them down until the work was done. You didn't become someone capable of that in a moment. You became it over years, over hard years and quiet years, and years when nobody was watching, and years when the weight felt unreasonable and you carried it anyway. You became it in field hospitals and compound corridors and hospital wards and break rooms that smelled like burned popcorn. You became it by refusing to be less, that what you were even in rooms that told you in 100 small ways that less was all they expected. The thing about being the person nobody sees coming is that eventually you arrive. And when you do, all those years of being underestimated, all those years of being talked past, dismissed, reclassified, told to wait for the labs, become the precise shape of the capability that was there the whole time. Not in spite of the dismissal. Through it, she picked up the first chart. She got to work.